Brandstorm, the podcast that talks to the people behind America's brands. I'm Dan Trzynski, president of Platypus Advertising and Design.
And I'm Nancy Christopher, PR director at Platypus. How ready is your company in the event of a crisis? Do you know your risks and how to protect your company from them? Today we're talking to Joe Simon, a corporate insurance consultant with Aon Risk Solutions, and our topic is risk management and how to protect your company from today's unprecedented volatility. Welcome to Brandstorm, Joe. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's a pleasure to be in the studio.
Well, we're excited to have you on board. So tell me a little bit about yourself and how you help companies.
I think the best way to approach that is we're students of the industry, and we try to be great students of our clients' industries.
I saw from a 2016 survey that Aon did, a company's brand reputation or protecting that company's brand reputation is the number one risk with U.S. companies. What are some of the things that can put a brand's reputation at risk?
It's a great question. And first time, Nancy, that Dan and I met each other, that was what I think brought us together, was the fact that the brand and branding business that you're in and the insuring and the risk management business that we are in over here really have a lot in common. The quick answer to that question is a couple things that can put your brand at risk is its quality. Believe it or not, the spokesperson, pricing, of course, and another big one is health risk.
What about things like what happens on social media, what's talked about your company, or does that fall under one of those umbrellas?
I think quality would be that umbrella. I like how you're creating that silo, so to speak, with media, social media, with blogging that's going on, like reputation. You know, the cell phone situation that took place in China back in 2016 when a gentleman's phone blew up, and as that was blowing up, someone that he was with took a video of that. It was a 2-minute video, and within 2 hours of that actually happening was posted on social media, went around the world, and the impact of that, the measurables of that was a 0.1% drop in the value of that company, which within a 90-day period of time actually ended up costing them $5 billion because they shut down production of that particular product to get it right and to work on getting their brand and their reputation and general public feeling safe, secure, and better about it. So you're right. Social media does play into that. And if I could add just one more thing, there was also a famous soft drink executive that made some comments that also went on social media and around the world, and that was felt by the lack of production and their stock price falling too. That also took place in 2016.
Well, and just thinking about the situation that happened with the airlines this past year where, one person has a fight and then there's a fight on another airline, and the way they handle it goes viral, and all of a sudden you've got a reputation problem on many levels.
Right. And as it pertains to insurance, because that's really what I can talk a little bit about here today, and as it pertains to brand reputation, that really spins into what we would categorize as product recall.
Sure.
And the things that come from the negativity or the loss of financial wherewithal because of the product being recalled. So the cell phone incident is one that would fall under a product recall. That's their brand, but that's their product. Now, if they had insurance coverage on that called product recall, there's various aspects of that absorb that type of risk, that financial risk, and limits, of course, as well. But that goes hand in hand when you sit down with your insurance advisor and or your marketing people, the people that are creating this brand and promoting it and moving it hopefully northward for you. You always get in the room and you look at what are the good things that are happening right now. You want to expand on this. You're moving this way with it. It's costing you this amount. We're investing this much into it. But what are the downsides to that if something bad really occurs? And that's where the product recall safety net called the insurance product comes in.
So what kind of questions should companies decision makers be asking themselves? And do you walk them through that of what the potential risks to their brand are? Because, you mentioned health. So obviously that can be a product liability or product makes somebody sick. But an employee, Nancy just mentioned the airlines, an employee goes rogue and, creates a problem. I mean, how do you think of all of that stuff ahead of time?
You hire great advisors on the risk side. And I know a great organization
Is there a process, though, that you take
There
people
is.
through? Okay.
Product recall touches so many parts of an organization. Let's think of this graphically for a moment in our minds. Think of a pyramid. At the top of the pyramid is your board of directors. And the board of directors have a lot of risk at stake, whether they believe it or not. So a product is recalled. Eventually, the board could be called in to represent this organization that they make decisions for and sign off on. So from an insurance perspective, there's errors and omissions insurance that a board of directors wants to have and make sure it's nailed down. It starts there. And what do the limits look like? You're making a product that's very expensive, and some very expensive things could happen, such as a lawsuit, possibly consumer's loss of life, maybe multiple losses of life. Are there contracts in place with governments that could affect a whole nation? And being sued by a nation can be very expensive. So does your errors and omissions insurance protect not only your top leaders of your organization, but then that's where the product recall then comes in to take place and be, again, that financial safety net. Are there other types of situations that could occur that might not necessarily be due to the product, but could it be due to the environment around the product, a fire or something of that nature, an earthquake, or just a poor situation in the way in which the manufacturing plant, let's say, was constructed? Are there ways in which insurance can protect not only the client, its product, but the general public? Those are some of the questions that we would go through and try to analyze. Lastly, this isn't a bunch of insurance agents running around getting in a room and going, how much do we want to charge them? The way we conduct it at Aon is we've been doing this process for over 50 years. We have, for example, in the food, ag, and bev industry in the United States, 70% of the Fortune 500 organizations are clients of ours. So that's a good example in this conversation. What we go into is the data of things that could happen, didn't happen, and the good and bad from those things. And then our actuaries start to work those numbers when compared to a client or a prospective client that we're working with. So that's kind of the magic sauce, so to speak, that we use when we come up with then reaching out to insurance companies, because we aren't an insurance company, we're insurance brokers, and we'll represent a multiple listing of great, highly rated insurance carriers. And then we go to, so to speak, have our day in court with them. Maybe that's a bad analogy, but we go.
Hope not.
We're trying to avoid court at this point,
yeah,
right?
we sit down with them and explain our case before they have a chance to explain theirs, and they know that's the way we conduct it. So a key word that was used here is we're brokers, we're not agents.
Right.
Brokers represent the client, agents represent the carrier. So as a broker, we're coming in loaded with great factual information that is trying to convince the insurance carrier, this is what I think or what we think you should do for our client based on our really great data.
Well, with all these crazy risks out there right now.
Well, the one thing he didn't mention, which I thought of while he was talking, was cybersecurity, because that's been a huge problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm looking at my top from the same report you read off of earlier, Nancy, the top 10 risks. Cyber is in the top 10. The report itself was done at the end of 2016. Cybercrime, hacking, viruses, malicious codes was number 5 on the list.
Yeah, and you would have thought that would be higher, wouldn't you?
Well, I haven't seen the figures. We did do the same report every year now for the last 3 years. I haven't seen 2017's yet. Cyber is definitely going to be in there, obviously in the top 5, possibly moving up the charts a little bit because of its popularity. And here's something, I'll jump the gun on this, is when you talk about brand reputation, what's starting to take place from the insurance perspective is this cyber protection. So cyber liability and cybersecurity are related, but they're two different things when an insurance consultant looks at them. Cyber liability is the insurance product, the packaging and the financing of if something bad goes wrong in that particular category, this is how it's going to benefit the purchaser of that product. Cybersecurity, obviously, is when bad things happen and there really isn't an insurance arm to that. And so then you have consultants that just provide the cybersecurity. We also have that can consult consult with an organization and say, okay, let's analyze the liabilities that could occur, what type of insurance product wraps around that, and what still is the exposure, and does that concern you, Ms. CEO? Is this something you feel if it really happens, you're going to be able to what we would call self-insure it? Or is this something that you're saying, you know what, this is something never happened before, this is the CEO talking, but now that you're in the room, we're going to let the cat out of the bag. This really concerns us. Can you go out and create an insurance protection, a liability product for something like this, which we in many cases have been able to do, which means going to the insurance carriers and saying, here's the situation, here's what we think, here's how bad it is for you and how bad it is for the client, and let's come up with a reasonable premium to charge and see if this is something the consumer wants to or the corporation wants to buy.
So insuring for damages is one thing. So because that's kind of, okay, these people were injured by some defect in your product. We know what that number is. We can make a settlement. But now how about rebuilding the brand's reputation? If you take cybersecurity, okay, the XYZ department store gets hacked and now it's the Christmas season and no one wants to shop there anymore.
Yep.
Can you insure to help rebuild the public trust in a brand?
That's a great segue, because those two insurance products I talked about a few minutes ago actually have to go hand in glove. So the department store that was hacked with the multiple social security numbers or credit card numbers, for example, is where the data value is. And that's what the hackers are looking for, and then they sell that off. In order to get the product recall policy in place, you must have the cyber liability policy in place. You can have a cyber policy in place without a product recall, but you can't have it the other way around. So when that bad thing happened that you just described a minute ago, Dan, they're going to say, wow, I hope we're covered. And the question is going to be, well, let's find out if you had product recall, number one. And then number two, let's find out if you had a cyber liability policy. The likelihood of them having a cyber liability policy, if you're talking about a publicly traded large Fortune 500 department store without mentioning any names, there's a very good chance they've already had that cyber liability policy in place. Product recall is another question. A lot of times people have a hard time understanding how deep that can cut. We have found in some cases that people have foregone that because they don't feel it's necessary. The food, egg, and bev industry is one that is a big believer in that. It's just a natural thing. There's a story of a client we had in the Midwest, food manufacturer, that had a bad thing happen on their properties. One of their warehouses burnt down, and now that wasn't due to their product, but it did affect their product a number of ways. Number one, they couldn't produce it because the warehouse, the manufacturing facility, was destroyed. There were several months before that was up and running again. And number two, there was a little bit of negativity out in the marketplace about the fact that their product, the story was public, their product may have been affected by it, which it wasn't. And of course, their competition went out and started to create ways in which they would attract consumers to try their product while the other product was kind of on ice. There was a financial setback for that our client, that particular situation, and they did have product recall. And the product recall was built into this that looked at things like, hey, there's going to be downtime. Let's project what could happen and how long that downtime could be and what those costs are. There's going to be an infection, so to speak, or a cancer possibly that grows around our name and this brand, and that's going to cost us. And all of these things were a part of this step-by-step process when that particular insurance product was looked at and put in place. So they knew they had that, and they knew what their limits were. So they couldn't come in and be convinced, well, it's time to create a new logo and
change
the name. Let's try to spin off a new product from the old product and have two products come out at the same time, the old and the new. It wouldn't pay for those things, but what it would say is, hey, you had product A and it's got a red, white, and blue logo. Let's say it wasn't the case here, but let's say it was. And all of those things are going to be brought back to where they were before this bad thing happened to you, and this insurance policy is going to provide a bunch of money for that up to a certain limit, which in this case was multi-millions of dollars.
A lot of the people we interface with are smaller businesses, and I'm always surprised at how many companies don't have a crisis plan in place. And we, of course, always say you need to have one. So what's the best way to be prepared, and what should be included in that plan, in your opinion?
Well, a crisis plan is pretty specific, and I think it's what it is. It's a plan that's put in place when a crisis happens. A
But we say
crisis
do
can,
one in advance.
right, meaning it's there, but it's ready to go in place. Kind of like having the fire extinguisher behind that little pane of glass, break glass in time of emergency.
Correct.
Correct.
Well, that's,
Yeah, that's right. Good analogy.
that's the crisis plan.
Right.
The crisis plan is there. It's loaded. It's been checked. Like your fire extinguisher down the hall, every so often the fire department has to come in and check it and validate it. That's your crisis plan. And I say when because that's the business I'm in, is risk. It's not saying, well, we're prepared and risk isn't going to happen here. It's a matter of risk will happen. How prepared are you? So the crisis plan comes in. That's the linchpin that kind of holds things together. Primarily, I think it's a psychological move by the organization's leadership to say, you know what, we've thought about these things. To be honest, everybody, there's about 90% of the things we've covered here, and let's face it, there's about 10% of those things that we're just going to learn on the fly, and that's
Sure.
okay. That's okay. That's why it's a crisis. We can't plan for 100% of what could happen, but we've got a good share of it taken care of. That's the crisis plan. The continuity plan is a different type of plan that people often confuse. Continuity could be anything from when Nancy retires or when Nancy goes on her 3-month cruise in the first quarter of
Wait a minute. Am I
next
missing
year.
something? Were you talking to Joe?
I don't know,
Off
but I'm
mic,
excited
yeah.
about that 3-month cruise.
Yeah, she's going to take 90 days and gone, and nobody's going to be able to get in touch with her, and that's a year to this date away. Well, what's the plan? That falls under continuity. Let's talk about, are there going to be other people that come up to take on those responsibilities? Nancy's involved with looking at the corporate risk. Who's going to be involved with that? Nancy holds responsibilities with key clients.
Nancy is irreplaceable.
Nancy's irreplaceable.
Quit building up Nancy. Nancy's going to want to raise by the time this podcast is over. So
Well, but Dan, that's a reality in business succession and continuity. There was a survey that was done about 5 years ago with this subject alone, which does play into what we're talking about here today. So hang on for a sec. But they asked business owners, and these were non-Fortune 500. So let's call them Fortune 5,000 or 10,000 companies, medium-sized corporations that you find a lot throughout the Midwest, third, fourth generation possibly. And the point was they surveyed people like this leadership, and they said, what do you think about continuity and business succession, having a plan like that for your business? And 80% of them said, definitely, got to do it. I don't know why you wouldn't want to do it. So then the next question was, okay, out of all you 80%, so 100% of those people, how many of you actually have a succession or continuity plan? And the number was staggering, 25%.
wow.
Yeah. I'm not surprised.
Last part on this is you got all these baby boomers today that are now jumping out the plane with their parachutes and retiring and going away. My question is, I wonder how many of those are leaving a company where they're a key person, and what state is this company going to be left in if they don't have a succession or a continuity plan?
And you help with those as well?
We do. That would be a different part of our company where we do executive benefit planning. Related to brand recognition and brand protection, kind of another conversation for another day.
Okay.
But a big issue that's out there today.
Well, one more point, I guess. We've talked a lot about when bad things happen, but as a broker, do you help companies avoid the bad thing happening where there could be potential training where you come in, look at what the potential risks are for the company and then say, I think you need to do this, this, and this, or put together a sexual harassment sensitivity training within your organization based on what's going on in the news today?
Exactly.
Is that something that's in your wheelhouse?
Yeah. Within our organization, there's, let's just call it 3 stools. You've got Aon Risk Solutions, and that is a lot of what we've been talking about to this point. Risk, things dealing with liabilities, what type of consulting or insurance product can we find or create and work with an insurance company in some cases to create something that's never been done before. Aon Hewitt is our health and benefits and employee benefits side, where we do consulting, and we also do the same thing. We'll go out and consult with companies on the employee benefits that they're providing, the trajectory of where this is going and where it needs to be financially and how those benefits should look, and maybe just hired to do that. Or in some cases, then the leaders of that corporation will say, now go out and negotiate and find insurance carriers and third-party administrators for us to work with. The last side is Benefield, Aon Benefield, and that is a reinsurance company that a lot of corporations don't know of because reinsurance is kind of the safety net to the insurance that's already in place at a large corporation. Many large hospital systems in the United States will have some form of insurance risk protecting them for, mega losses of some kind. In some cases, you'll find that Aon Benefield's product is underneath that as a reinsurance to strengthen that insurance carrier that's in there as number one. I guess another part to that would be this executive benefit consulting that we do, anything from executive coaching to creating fringe benefits for a handful of executives at companies, things like that. We can either consult on that or actually create insurance products or applications that are needed.
We talked a lot about things that are insurable. What isn't insurable?
That is a good question. I really don't know from Aon's perspective, trying to sound as humble as possible. I don't know what it is that we could not come up with an insurance solution for. And here's an example of something that I thought would never be insured, and we did this, I believe it was last year. There was a skydiver that wanted to break the world record in skydiving, and I believe the record was at 30,000 feet, and he jumped at 35,000 feet.
Oh, yeah, I remember this.
And we insured
Stunning.
that gentleman. There was nothing like that, but we were able to come up with an insurance product design and then find a couple insurance carriers that partnered to create a product to insure this gentleman in the event of his death or if there were liabilities involved with that jump.
That was a crazy jump.
So
Spectacular to look at.
So let me ask you the crystal ball question here. What risks do you think will emerge in the coming years that people may not even be aware of now? Or do you see anything on the horizon that companies should be thinking about now?
Well, I love that question. I think the future is now, but what I think is happening before us is stuff that the insurance industry has never seen before. I heard a senior level executive that's been doing this for a long, long time say that when it comes to cyber liability and where cyber is going in artificial intelligence, the outlook, the vision of that is very much like when the insurance industry started 200 plus years ago. The path is not cut. There's a lot of smart people trying to figure out and guess and try to get the unknowns in the room and figure out what it is that they can try to protect and insure. But my answer to your question, Dan, is artificial intelligence is the next frontier where risk is and how dangerous this can be if it's left unwatched. And the classic example of how fast this is working is, I believe it was about 2 months ago, Saudi Arabia recognized a robot as a citizen. That's never happened before.
Yeah, I saw something like that on CNBC.
And if you saw the robot in that press conference, the robot represented itself.
I saw this, yeah.
So
it was creepy.
The robot walked up to the podium and was not only talking like you would, actually had voice inflection, but had facial inflection and would pause and look into the audience and blink, and very human. The first artificial intelligence, really, to be almost given human-like credit. So my answer, long answer to a small but very important question. So if I'm a decision maker of a corporation listening to this right now, artificial intelligence, you're nodding your head, yes, but the further down the road you go, the more you're going to be pulled towards that new workhorse called artificial intelligence. The last thing I'm going to tie this in with is our statistics show when you talk about cyber breaches right now, which tie into artificial intelligence, the number one breach that's taking place is called corporate espionage. And that means the inside, the employee who's disgruntled and then released on Friday, who knew this, who could see it coming, timed a way in which they could shut your entire operation down, and now there you sit. And yes, you better have product recall in place because there are going to be angry clients when things back up. So you take the artificial intelligence with the cyber liability and the product recall or the brand protection, and they're all interrelated as we head forward.
So one more quick follow-up on this. It prompted another thought when you said artificial intelligence. What about the driverless car?
I was thinking the exact same thing.
It's coming, it's here already.
It's here, yeah.
And if Nancy crashes, I'm going to give Nancy some. If Nancy crashes into one of these things, who's responsible?
Well, that won't happen because the car's so smart it's just going to veer out
I
of the way,
don't think so. You haven't seen Nancy drive.
Well,
no comment.
We'll edit that out. That plays right into what I was saying is we are moving into a bold new frontier We don't have a lot of driverless cars roaming around the United States yet. The experiences that exist right now, Switzerland has been using driverless semis for the last year, and there have been no negative reports on that. I think you're going to see those come into the United States, the driverless semis, as well as the driverless cars. Being Wisconsinites, the largest economic deal ever in the United States history is Foxconn coming to the southeast corner of Wisconsin. If you don't know where Wisconsin is, go to Chicago and head north. Right across the border is where all of this is going to be taking place. And the plans are already in place to have, as the interstates and the freeways expand, there will be a lane going each way that will be for driverless cars.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. I know there are some cities that are actually setting themselves up as test markets for the driverless car.
I think that it's kind of a sexy thing to talk about from an insurance perspective right now. There are a lot of insurance carriers very nervous about that.
I suspect even the owner is going to be a little nervous about getting into this frontier too.
Right.
So, Joe, to those listening, what's the biggest thing companies should really take away from this discussion today?
Well, I think it's very interesting how Platypus is an organization that does great work in the area of creating a brand. That just doesn't happen. And then you flip it to the other side and look at Aon. And the way I would look at this is to say that if you're not going deep and doing the analytics and doing the planning and the strategizing, at least on an annual basis, because the speed of business is just moving at warp speed right now, there's something seriously wrong. An insurance product that's put in place without the fact-finding and the strategizing that has to take place is nothing more than a Band-Aid. And if you do the right consulting, have the right advisors come in and ask the right questions ongoing, and then also a little plug for us, be students of the industry that you have. Right. You know, whoever's listening right now, whatever they manufacture, there's a very good chance we have people that are actual students, have walked through bad things happening in the industry, and they may not be in the Chicagoland area or the Wisconsin area, but we bring them in and we solidify the fact that we know your business, and now let's talk out how the insurance needs to wrap around your business with that knowledge on the table and in place.
Well, thanks, Joe. Thanks for that plug, and thanks very much for all of your insight and your time today.
Yeah, there's so much to think about nowadays.
It's crazy. So if our listeners have any further questions, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
They could email me, and my email is joe.simon@aon.com.
Thank you, Joe. And for everybody listening, if you like what you've heard today, please don't forget to share, review, and subscribe to Brandstorm.
This is Dan Trzynski along with Nancy Christopher at Platypus Advertising and Design, an awesome company that creates perceptions that influence choice for a variety of regional, national, and even global brands on a daily basis. We hope you join us next week for another episode of Brandstorm.